So you'd like to write a book. So last fall, a good friend of mine, Roger Gandini, passed away. Roger was the guy that gave all these posters from 2003 to the present. Although this year he didn't give the posters, you know, he was gone. And I got thinking, all these years I had thought to myself, geez, I'd like to write a book. And at Christmas time, someone brought me a book. It was called Hope to Community. And it was about what people were doing during the COVID. And I thought to myself, wow, how could they write a book, you know, within a year's time? And I said, well, maybe if they did it, I could do it. So I looked in the book, and sure enough, the publisher was just in Framingham. And I thought to myself, well, that's close, you know. If I get in trouble, since I'm not a real author, I could run over there and find out how to do this book thing. So I called Lynne. She's over there. And she asked me some questions. She was probably going, okay, here's another person that, you know, ain't gonna follow through. She said, do you have anything written? And I said, well, a little bit. The rest is kind of in my head. Oh, well, that's a start. She was being nice. The thing was that she started asking some questions, kind of shop lingo, and I go, what the heck is she talking about? But we kind of muddled through, and the big thing is she gave me a deadline, which was good for me. So bingo, 2.5 months into it, she says, okay, we're ready to go to press. At that point, I sat down, and in 2.5 weeks, I wrote the second book. And when you're doing this, the first one, I kept thinking about Roger having passed away of leukemia. And I said, oh, I got to get through this. I'll never finish. I could be dead before it's done. Well, I'm not dead. And the second book, as I said, in 2.5 weeks, I sat down and wrote it out. One thing led to another. I did a little more research on book number 2, and I was looking for Vinnie Mullen, who they lived right up the street from me. And he had passed away. I remember some of the kids' names, and I says, I know who will know. Michael Moore will know. Michael still lives in the house that he grew up in on Prospect Street. He says, well, I don't know where the kids are. I said, you don't know where your own cousins are? They'd be like second cousins. No. Well, in looking for this information, come to find out one of the cousins was right down at St. Mary's Church. So the next time I saw Michael, I says, you don't attend Mass too often, do you? He says, well, did you know across the street they would bring dogs from World War II and retrain them? I says, I didn't know that. He says, yeah. He says, as a matter of fact, they wrote a book about it, and it was called Teach Your Dog Obedience. And so I had called Evan Kempton, who grew up and still lives there. And he says, oh yeah, I got that book, I'll bring it down to you. Sure enough, he brought it down. And when he brought it down, he says, did you know my father wrote a book? And I said, no. He says, yeah, it's called Dynamite on the Desk. Here it is. This book was published after his death. He had written the book, and it's all about his days from the ROTC that he was in, right through World War II, D-Day, and he was a part of civil affairs. And I hate to admit it, but I hadn't read a book in a long time. And I sat down and I read this in one night. And he talks about being in a Jeep, and he's talking with this guy he's giving a ride, Strom Thurmond. I thought to myself, huh? Sure enough, same Strom Thurmond. That's a senator now, South Carolina, North Carolina, something like that. And then he goes on talking about going over to doing the civil affairs thing in a unit, and they were all taken prisoner of war. Come to find out that one of the people in that unit was Ed Cassidy, who would later move down to 32 Quincy Place, right below 55 Prospect Street. So the more you do and research, you find out all these things that, you know, I had no clue. I grew up 3 doors down from that barn where they trained the dogs, and I never knew. No one ever said anything, you know, which was fantastic. This is a local book. This is of no interest to anybody outside of Holliston unless you have a relative in there. And primarily what I did it for was posterity. And if you look through the book, I mean, we have Altheimer, Chamberlain, G.R. Russell. G.R. Russell owned Russell's store, Russell's Market, where CVS Pharmacy is now. The old store that they tore down. And I remember watching it being torn down in 1959, and they put the new place up, and his son-in-law, Freddie Cole. So it's fun to watch people from town look and go, oh, I know that guy, I know, oh, I didn't know they were in the military. You know, that's what the book is all about. It was never money, was the last thing on my mind. And Lynne helped me out. I didn't know who to put in there. The first book was like, okay, I had the pictures of Civil War veterans, and I had quite a few of World War I, but I put World War II in there. And then I came up with the Lions Club newsletter during World War II, a wealth of information. Excuse me. And even though a lot of them guys had passed away, I could make a connection. I knew who to go to find out the information. There was a kid, when I was writing for the Holliston Reporter, I did a story, 2 stories on him. He had come back from Iraq, Michael Sullivan. And I tracked him down, got a hold of his mother. He was out in Colorado. I called him up. I says, have you got a picture of yourself? Yeah. I said, well, you remember your great-grandfather? And he said, no, I don't. And I went, oh, okay, I've aged. I said, yeah, he lived at 70 Central Street. He says, no, I've heard about him. He says, I don't even have a photo. Bingo, I had the photo. So it's as much me reconnecting with all these folks. And I mean, in here we have, I tried to cover everyone. I didn't know about Charlie Nickerson. I didn't even know he was in the military. Come to find out, here he is. And he had to be 18 and 19 years old. He tried to get into the military when he was 15 or 16. Well, they found out and he couldn't get in. He had lost a brother in Southeast Asia. He wanted to get in. He was the last of the brothers. And here he is being presented his second Silver Star by General James Gavin, who was the youngest general in World War II. Who would have known, you know? And we have the pictures of the VFW firing squad. Most of these people are all gone now, you know? So we have Peter Holmberg here, who passed away a few years ago. He was the most decorated guy in Vietnam from town, and he's buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Laura Hines, who 2 doors over here, she lived on the corner of Winter Street, and this is her in Vietnam. And she was there at the same time I was. She was a nurse down in Quin Yon, and we would send notes back and forth to each other. And she's out in Washington State now. Here's Herb Brockett, you know. So if you want to write a book, Lynn is the person to see. Everybody keeps asking me, are you going to do book number 3? Well, I don't know. I mean, there's enough information out there. And I suppose if I can do 2, this is not a promise for book number 3. I could do a 3rd one, but I could do a little more research. The first book, you know, I told a little something about everyone. The second one, a little more about everyone. And I suppose book number 3, you know, if I took my time, it'd work. Lynn can probably tell you how to get started. So without further ado, I'll have her up here.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to be here, and thank you, Bobby, for inviting me. When I was in 5th grade with a friend, we created a mimeographed newsletter for our neighborhood and sold it for $0.05 a piece. And interestingly, the mascot of our school was the Viking, and so we called ourselves the Viking Press. Little did we know there was another company out there. Fast forward, I became a professional photographer, and I wanted to document the historic mill building that I had my photography studio in for 17 years in downtown Framingham. It was the Fountain Street Studios along the railroad tracks. And when I created my first book, it was very challenging. I didn't know what I was doing. It cost me a lot of money, and I made a lot of mistakes. And so when I did my second book about the historic Saxonville Mills in Framingham, I had learned a lot, and I started having people come to me asking me to help them publish their books. And I said, look, I'm not a publisher, but they said, but you know how to do this now, you figured it out. So I started helping people, and as of today, I've published over 50 books for others. And when Bobby came to me and he said, how long will this take and what do I need to do? I'm very good at giving people deadlines and being their project manager, but I never expected him to actually do it in such a short period of time. He's really a great example for everybody, because when he says he's going to do something, he does. And he makes my job really easy. And one of the things that I really enjoy about working with people is hearing their stories and feeling the passion and helping preserve history for forever. So whether and how many of you out here are interested in actually writing a book? Or are you here more to hear about Bobby's 2 books? Is anyone interested in actually doing their own book? Maybe a little bit? Okay, well, I'll kind of quickly go through some of the process, and then we can obviously talk afterwards or at a later point. Whether you're interested in history, the traditional type of history, or a different type of history, this book was actually written by a minister who was 90 years old, who interviewed people from his church about what it felt like to age. That was kind of interesting. Or children's books. This was a book written by a young woman who was a school teacher. And when she was a school teacher, she had written this book, and her mother kept the hand-made book for many, many years. And her mother brought the book to us, and we ended up publishing it as a surprise for her daughter. And what's really cool is that the proceeds go to a charity. So that was kind of interesting. We have some local authors who have written poetry books. Some of the books, like the Hopkinton Through Poetry, was a collaboration with many different authors. So similar to Bobby's book, when you involve more than one person, it's collectively something that gets built up, and it really builds a community, actually, to publish a book like this and bringing people together like Bobby did. It's a really wonderful thing. We've done some photography books, etc. So what does it take to write a book? Well, first of all, you need to have your idea, and obviously writing the book. And I had an author that came to me last week, and she said, I have a zillion pieces of paper with poems on them, and can I just give them to you and have you just take care of the rest? I said, well, I could do that, but that's really not the best idea. So we'll talk about what is a better idea. But basically, the 7 steps to writing a book, in my opinion, are writing it, having it professionally edited and proofread, the design of the book, project managing, which is really what I do as the publisher, and then printing the book. So Bobby had a bunch of books printed for himself that he could sell or give away. But the books can also be available online, so that if you don't want to spend money printing a bunch of books, you can have them online through our distributor or Amazon, etc. So people can order a book. They're printed one at a time, and the author doesn't have to worry about stockpiling books or fulfilling orders. So that can be really nice. In Bobby's case, he's doing both. So he has his pile of books, but they're also available online as well. And then, of course, marketing. Now, this guy over here, Bobby, is a great marketing person. He's very well connected. He has a lot of ideas, but not everybody is. So one of the things that we do is help give people ideas on how to sell their book. So the first step, as far as writing goes, and getting back to the woman who had a lot of different pieces of paper, my suggestion is to have a folder, whether it's a paper folder or a folder on your computer, and start putting your documents all in one place. And eventually, even if you have separate documents, you're going to want to turn them into one document. So, copying and pasting them, for example, into one Word document. You may have ideas for things that you like for the cover. You may want to have maybe some snapshots or some cutouts of things that you've seen that you really like, so that when you go to put your book together, you already have some ideas generated. And you certainly want to run your manuscript through a spell check, if you can, on the computer. When you're writing a book, most of us are concerned about the main portion of the book, the body of the book. But there are other parts as well to think about. One is, do you need a table of contents so people can find, for example, the different veterans in the book? Do you want to have a dedication or acknowledgments? And what about the author? And many authors are shy and they don't really want to put anything about themselves in the book. But it's another form of marketing, and if you want people to be able to reach you, it's a good idea to have a few snippets, maybe a website or a Facebook page where people can reach out to you if they've seen the book. You also might want to think about testimonials for the back of the book because it can give your book some more credibility. And finally, do you need an index? And not many books need an index unless they are, historical in nature. You have a lot of different characters in the book, etc. And that can be something that can be time consuming, but could be well worth doing depending on the type of book that you have. Now, I have a lot of people that say, oh, I don't need to have my book edited. It's good, I'm a writer, etc. Well, it's really a good idea to have somebody else who is not you take a look at the book, because they're going to find things that you are so used to seeing that you gloss over and you don't see. So there's different types of editing. Some people, Bobby had a great idea for his book and he knew pretty much what he was going to do. But some people have a lot of different things that they can put into their book and they don't really know the best way to put it together. So do they organize it this way or that way? And you may want to work with an editor who can kind of look at the big picture and help guide you with that. So 3 types of editing. One is developmental, which is kind of the big picture. One is copy editing, where you're looking at readability, making sure that things are consistent, are there grammatical errors or not, etc., and factual errors or not. And then finally, proofreading. Of course, once something is pretty much done, just making sure that everything is looking correct and as it should. Then we get into design. A lot of times, if you do a Google search for the name of a book, you may see there's a lot of books with a similar or same name is something that you might be considering. So it's a good idea to do your homework and make sure that there's nothing with the exact name that you're considering for your book. You could also have a subtitle that separates your book from others with a similar title. So that's a good thing to do. Now, you may develop a working title, which may change over time as the book is being put together, but think about some catchy things that you might consider for the title of your book. And then finally, think about a reasonable schedule. Now, I like to have a deadline because if you have a deadline, it's going to help encourage you to get something done by a certain time, rather than the half-life theory where you just kind of keep going and going and it never gets done. But also, there may be an event coming up, for example, a holiday, Christmas, I don't know, Valentine's Day, where you want to have the book available for a special occasion. Maybe you're giving a lecture, a talk, and it's good to have that book there for you. So if you know when you'd really like to have your book done, we can work our way backwards and figure out when you need to have your manuscript done, the cover design done, etc. As far as the design itself, some authors may actually have a good idea of what they want. Bobby knew what he wanted for his cover. You may have things that you like, but we work with a designer who can give you several concepts, and you might say, oh, I like this portion of design number 1 and this portion of design number 3, and then we will merge them together and work with you to develop that. So one of the things that I did not like when I went to publish my first book was that I looked at 16 different publishers, and they all had these little packages that seemed really great, but I ended up finding that if I went with a certain package, I would end up paying for more than I really wanted, and they didn't have maybe one item that I desired. So I couldn't find the right package for me, and that's why I ended up doing it myself, and that's why now, for me, as a publisher, I'm a hybrid publisher. So what that means is that I don't require an author to have a certain package. I tailor what you need to what you're going to pay for, and we develop our package for you specifically. And on my website, damianospublishing.com, I have a resource page including a design and production checklist so that you can kind of go through this and tick off things that might jolt your memory as far as, oh yes, I should do some testimonials, or oh yes, I should do this or that. And that's available for free as a download from my website. Just some examples. One author came to us, she's an artist and a writer, and this was her idea for her children's book as far as the cover goes. And so this was a repetition of one of her paintings, and what we ended up with was this. So we used the same painting, but brought in some of the same colors on the cover to have the text, the background, etc. And I think you'll agree that it's a much more vibrant color and vibrant design. This is the back cover of my first book, and I'm sure you can't read this, but what we did was I went to the History Center in Framingham and I asked her for a testimonial because no one had done a historical book about this particular mill building. And because I went to her and we got her testimonial, she actually put this building on the house tour, even though it was not a house, it was a mill building. And that really helped market the book and sell a lot of copies as well. So the collaboration and getting different parties together can really make a big difference into how your book is presented to the world. The young author whose mother published her book for her, this is Carrie, and she put the about the author on the back of her cover, and she also indicated the charity that her proceeds from her book would go to. And this helped sell the book as well, because when you have a charity, people really like that idea, and so that's what we ended up doing for her. Working with a designer can help you think a little bit outside the box. So for example, this is the page where we have in memorandum, we have gratitude, and then we also list 2 other books by the same author. And this book was about his wife who had passed away, and this tree was planted in her honor, so he included that tree along with the memorial statement and his gratitude, which we thought was quite nice. Your table of contents also does not have to be dry. You could include a photograph, you could include color, etc. So this is just an example of something that kind of gives a little bit more design, a little bit more interesting feel than just a list of words. You may say, well, do I really need a designer if I'm mostly going to have text and a few photographs? Well, if you look at this particular page, this is a page from the Saxonville Mills book. And if you notice that we have some dashes at the top of the book, and those dashes are like stitches. And the reason that we included those is because the book is about a mill complex that created wool carpet that was stitched. So we wanted to bring in some little design elements that actually looked interesting but had a meaning. We also have dates, so that's called a running header, where you have the name of each chapter at the top of the page rather than just nothing. And then at the bottom, we have a running footer which has the name of the book as well. Besides our text and our body text, on the right-hand side, we have a little call out, so an area that talks about a different subject. So we had interviews with people that used to work in the mills, and that kind of added to the story. And we separated that out as a design element so that whenever there was an interview with somebody, it was in gray with a black header, and then the rest of the body text had its own look. So we developed some style sheets. And that can make your book look a lot more interesting. So what do I do as a publisher? People always ask me that question. Well, I bring together all of the pieces. So I work with the author, the designer, the editor, the printer. I get the book available for online distribution. I register the book with the Library of Congress. I purchase the ISBN number, which is like the serial number for your book. And I create a press release, and I manage royalties. So what happens is, well, we'll talk about that on the next slide. Some people say, I just want to print a bunch of books and have books to sell or give away or provide to local stores to sell. And other people may want to have the books available online. And I think it's a good idea to actually do both. It doesn't really cost any more. What happens is, if you're printing the books and stockpiling them yourself, for example, Bobby printed a bunch of books, so he had to pay for the books. He keeps them stored somewhere, and then when he sells them, he makes a little bit of money. That's great. But he had to pay for them up front to have them printed. If you have your books published on demand, print on demand, or POD, That means the books are printed one by one as they're ordered online. So if Jane Doe goes to order one of Bobby's books, he doesn't have to do anything. She orders the book online from Amazon or our distributor. She pays for it. It's printed and shipped directly to her. And then eventually, Bobby will get a royalty for the sale of that book. The difference is that royalty is going to be a lesser amount than if you would buy the book yourself and sell it. So there's more profit in doing it that way than doing it online, but there's less investment online because you're not putting money out to have your books printed. So what I do is I set that up for the author, and then when the royalties come in from the distributor and from Amazon, I divvy them up amongst the authors. Now, interestingly, marketing can be a variety of different things. And some of us are not really great at social media and that type of thing, but if you are, there's nothing wrong with tooting your own horn, putting your book information on Facebook or your website. Maybe you do a blog. Maybe you have book signing events or speaking events like we have tonight. One of the interesting things is that the book that I published about the Saxonville Mills has sold hundreds and hundreds of copies, not in a local bookstore, but at a local hardware store. Why? Well, the hardware store is across the street from the mills. A lot of people that used to work in the mills or their parents that used to work in the mills go to that hardware store. I know the owner, and I said, hey, would you be interested in selling this book? And he said, sure, just put a pile of them on the counter. He gets about 2,000 customers a week that come through, and every single one of them would see the book, and they flew out of there. Who would have thought of selling a $30 book in a hardware store that was not about home do-it-yourself? So I thought that was really interesting. If you have a children's book, maybe you sell the book at a children's clothing store or a toy store. If you have a book about history, there's a lot of different places where you can have that book available as well. You know, historical societies, different events relating to the history of whatever the project is about. So think outside the box. And one of the things that I do is I ask my authors, what connections do you have? What's your alma mater? What organizations are you involved with? Et cetera, et cetera. And I gather from the author email addresses from those places, and along with my own list for emails, such as local libraries, the Boston Globe, other publications, I will send out an email blast to give a press release about the new book. And a lot of times the newspapers will pick it up, and that certainly helps spark sales. I recently published a book for the Dedham Historical Society about 3 brothers who wrote letters to their mother while they were in the Civil War. And the Boston Globe picked up the press release and ran a large article in the Sunday Globe right before Christmas last year. And in about 5 minutes, they sold 97 books. And the printer called me up and they said, what's going on? And they said, we better start printing some extra books just to make sure. So I thought that that was really, a great thing. So timing was good. It was right before the holidays. But when you have a large organization like the Globe publish something, it gets noticed. Also, some authors would like to have book reviews, so we encourage people to ask their friends or people that have read the book to post reviews, those 5 stars that you see on Amazon, et cetera. Give it a rating and ask for a testimonial. And if you're shy, I can ask your friends to do that for you. You can't do it for yourself or Amazon will get mad. And then we also have a marketing person who specializes in helping market your book. So he can help with setting up speaking engagements and coming up with some creative ways to have your book marketed. So that's pretty much it for my talk. I have a little slide here which was probably hard to read, but it compares what I do to online and traditional publishers. Some of the main differences are that a traditional publisher basically will give an author in advance, so the author is not paying to publish their own book, but they take very few authors out of all the many authors out there. And you typically have to have a literary agent who specializes in the genre of book that you are writing. And it's very, very difficult to get a literary agent. And one of our local authors, her last name is Salinger. She comes from a long line of very famous authors. And she has written 2 books that were published through a large traditional publisher. And she was so disappointed with the service she got from her literary agent that she decided to have her third book published by me. And I was stunned because, you know, you assume that these big publishers are going to do a wonderful job. So she felt like she was just not given the time of day, and she was very, very pleased with working with us. So that was kind of a nice thing. The other thing is that if you do publish a book and later on you decide that a big publisher is going to take it or you want to do something different with it, we do not hold any rights to our author's books. So the author owns their complete rights. And if Bobby, for example, wanted to go and have his book distributed in another way, we would simply have him get a new ISBN number, give us 2 weeks notice, and then he could have his book produced elsewhere if he wanted to do that. And that's important too, because when you're with a big traditional publisher, that is not the case. So that's it for me. And if you are interested in publishing a book, I do offer a complimentary 1-hour consult, and it can be with myself, the designer, and the editor, and we will see what you have and help you get on your way. But thank you all for being here. I have some examples on the table over here of other books that I've published along with my business card. And thank you, Bobby, for having me.